The ocean world of Prime had never known war. Its people, had built their civilization beneath gentle waves and across thousands of floating cities. They were small creatures with silver-blue skin and large dark eyes that reflected the light of their twin moons. They sang to each other across the waters. They built beautiful things. They believed the universe was kind. Stood at the observation window of the high chamber, watching the sky. She was old now. Her silver skin faded to pale gray, but her mind remained sharp. For 60 years she had led her people through peace and plenty. Now she watched their death fall slowly toward them. The asteroid had no name. The had simply called it the Shadow. It was 300 kilometers wide, a mountain of rock and iron tumbling through space. In 90 days it would strike Prime. The oceans would boil. The floating cities would burn. Every song they had ever sung would be silenced forever. Had sent messages to the Galactic Concord on the first day. The Concord was an alliance of 12 spacefaring species, ancient civilizations that had mastered the stars long before they learned to build boats. Surely they would help. Surely someone would come. The first response came from the Eye, a species of tall beings known for their vast trading empire. Their message was polite and cold. They had calculated the cost of deflecting an asteroid of that size. They had also calculated the economic output of Prime. The numbers did not balance. They produced nothing the Eye needed. Intervention was not profitable. The second response came from the Dominion. They were warriors, conquerors who respected only strength. Their admiral sent a single line, "The weak do not deserve rescue." One by one, the other species of the Conquered replied. Some offered sympathy. Some offered nothing at all. They said they would pray for souls. They said they were too far away. The hollow ones did not respond at all. Read each message in the silence of her chamber. When the last one arrived, she sat very still for a long time. Then she called for Admiral. Was a soldier in a species that had no wars. He commanded the defense fleet, which was really just a collection of old cargo ships fitted with engines fast enough to chase pirates away from trade routes. He was a practical man with tired eyes and hands that had grown rough from years of work. When he entered the high chamber, he already knew what would say. "They will not come," said. Her voice was steady but could see the weight of those words pressing down on her. "We are alone." Nodded slowly. He had expected nothing else. The galaxy was vast and cold, and small species like they had always survived by staying out of sight. They had no weapons to offer, no resources to trade, no power to threaten anyone with. They were simply not important enough to save. "I will prepare our people," said. "We have bunkers deep beneath the ocean floor. Some might survive the initial impact, perhaps enough to rebuild." But they both knew the truth. The bunkers would buy them days at most. When an asteroid that size struck water, it would create waves tall enough to touch the clouds. The heat would turn the upper ocean into steam. Nothing would survive. Dismissed him with a gentle wave of her hand. Bowed and left, his footsteps heavy on the crystal floor. That night, Lieutenant could not sleep. She was only daughter, 24 years old, with her father's tired eyes and her mother's stubborn heart. Her mother had died when was young, taken by a sickness that swept through the southern cities. Had learned early that the universe did not care about fairness. She sat in the communications center of her father's flagship, scrolling through ancient records. They had been listening to the stars for centuries, collecting signals from across the galaxy. Most were meaningless noise. Some were echoes of dead civilizations, but deep in the oldest archives found something strange. It was a message from a species she had never heard of. The signal was weak, distorted by distance and time. It had been sent from a small blue planet on the very edge of the galaxy, a place so far from the trade routes that no one had bothered to visit it. The species called themselves humans. Their message was simple. "We are here, we are listening. If you can hear this, you are not alone." Read the message 3 times. It was old, perhaps 100 years old. The humans had sent it out into the void with no expectation of reply, no demand for payment, no calculation of profit. They had simply wanted someone to know they existed. She searched for more information about this species. There was almost nothing in the archives. The Conquered had classified Earth as a primitive world, not worth contacting. The humans had only recently developed faster-than-light travel. They were considered insignificant. But they had sent a message saying they were listening. Found her father on the observation deck, staring at the stars. He looked older than she had ever seen him. "Father," she said, "I found something." Listened as she explained. When she finished, he shook his head slowly. "A species the Conquered considers primitive," he said. "What could they possibly do against an asteroid 300 kilometers wide?" "I do not know," admitted, "but they said they were listening. The Conquered calculated our worth and found us lacking. These humans did not calculate anything. They just reached out." "It is foolish hope," said. "Yes," agreed, "but it is the only hope we have left." Was silent for a long time. He watched the stars wheel slowly overhead, thinking of his daughter and his people and the world that would burn in 90 days. The galaxy had turned its back on them. Every powerful species had measured their lives against profit and found them worthless. What did they have to lose by asking one more time? "Send the message," he said quietly. Worked through the night. She composed their plea carefully, describing the asteroid, their situation, their desperate need. She included everything: the size of their population, the timeline of their extinction, the responses they had received from the Conquered. She wanted the humans to understand exactly what they were asking. At dawn, she stood before the transmission array with her father beside her. The message would take several days to reach Earth, traveling faster than light through relay stations that had built generations ago. "If they answer," said, "they will have less than 80 days to reach us." "If they answer," repeated. He did not sound hopeful. "Press the button." The array hummed to life, sending their cry out into the darkness between stars. She watched the signal disappear into the void, carrying with it the last hope of her people. Somewhere across the galaxy, on a small blue planet that the powerful species of the Conquered had dismissed as unimportant, the message would arrive. Someone would read it. Someone would have to decide whether strangers on the other side of the universe were worth saving. Did not know if the humans would answer. She did not know if they could help even if they wanted to. But for the first time in weeks, she felt something other than despair. She had asked. Now all she could do was wait. Dr. Park had not slept in 36 hours. She sat in the control room of the Global Aerospace Defense Initiative, surrounded by screens showing data from listening stations across the solar system. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago. Her eyes burned from staring at numbers and charts. The message had arrived at 3 in the morning, Earth time. A junior technician had flagged it as unusual and sent it up the chain. By the time it reached desk, she had already been awake for a full day dealing with budget meetings and equipment failures. She read it once, then read it again. Then she picked up her phone and called the Secretary General of the United Earth Council. "We have a situation," she said. Within 6 hours, the most powerful leaders on Earth had gathered in Geneva. The council chamber was vast and circular, filled with representatives from every nation. They had built this room after the Unity Wars, when humanity had finally stopped fighting itself and started reaching for the stars. The walls were lined with flags from 200 countries, all of them united under the blue banner of Earth. Stood before them and played the message from Prime. The room fell silent as they listened to the voice of, translated into English by their computers. When it finished, no one spoke for a long moment. "This is authentic," said. "We have the signal origin. The planet exists. The asteroid exists. Their situation is exactly as they describe." Secretary General leaned forward in her chair. She was a small woman with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had led humanity through 3 crises in her 10 years of service. She had never faced anything like this. "How far away is this planet?" she asked. 42 days at maximum speed," replied, "if we leave within the next 72 hours. And the Galactic Concord refused to help them. Every member species declined. They calculated that they were not worth the cost of intervention. A murmur ran through the chamber. Humanity had joined the galactic community only 20 years ago, after developing faster-than-light travel. They had been treated as newcomers, primitives, a species barely worth acknowledging. The Conquered had not even offered them a seat at their table. Finance Minister raised his hand. He was a careful man who counted every credit and questioned every expenditure. "What exactly are they asking us to do?" "Deflect an asteroid 300 kilometers wide," said. "We would need to send our entire experimental deflection fleet, all 17 ships, plus support vessels, personnel, and equipment." "That fleet represents 12 years of development," said. "If we lose it, we lose our ability to protect our own planet from similar threats." "That is correct." "And what do we get in return? What can they offer us?" Paused. She had known this question would come. She had spent the flight to Geneva trying to think of a good answer. "Nothing," she said finally. "They are a peaceful species with limited technology. They have no military power, no valuable resources, no strategic importance. The Conquered was right about that much. By any practical calculation, helping them makes no sense." The chamber erupted in argument. Some representatives demanded to know why they were even considering this. Others insisted that humanity had a moral duty to help. The noise grew louder and louder until Secretary General raised her hand for silence. "I would like to hear from Commander," she said. The room fell quiet. Everyone knew Commander. He was a legend among the astronaut corps, a man who had walked on 3 moons and survived 2 ship failures that should have killed him. He was also a man who had lost everything. Stood slowly. He was 53 years old, with gray at his temples and deep lines around his eyes. In 2089, a catastrophic flood had swept through Seoul, killing 40,000 people in a single night. His wife and 2 children had been among them. He had been in orbit at the time, watching helplessly as the waters rose. "I have heard all the arguments about cost and benefit," said. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the chamber. "I understand them. They make sense." He paused, looking around at the assembled leaders. "But let me tell you what I heard in that message. I heard a people who reached out into the darkness because they had no other choice. They asked every powerful civilization in the galaxy for help. Every single one said no. They calculated the worth of an entire species and decided it was not enough." He took a breath. "Now they are asking us, a species that the galaxy considers primitive and unimportant. They are asking because we are their last hope and they have nothing left to lose." His eyes found the Secretary General. "The question is not whether we can afford to help them. The question is what kind of people we want to be." The galaxy turned away. "Are we going to prove them right about us?" The chamber was silent. Watched the faces of the representatives, seeing the conflict in their eyes. They were thinking of budgets and resources and practical concerns. They were also thinking of their children, their families, their own desperate prayers in times of crisis. Secretary General stood. "We will vote," she said. "All in favor of sending aid to Prime, raise your hands." The hands went up slowly at first, then faster. Counted them, her heart pounding. When the count was finished, she closed her eyes in relief. The motion passed by a margin of 3 votes. Captain Moon received her orders 2 hours later. She was 38 years old, a decorated officer who had commanded deep space missions for a decade. When she read the briefing, she did not hesitate. "I need volunteers," she told her crew. "This is a one-way trip for anyone who goes. 42 days there, then the mission itself. We may not have enough fuel to return. I need people who understand that and are willing to go anyway." She expected a handful of responses. She received over 4,000 applications in the first 12 hours. Worked around the clock preparing the fleet. 17 ships, each carrying experimental asteroid deflection equipment that had never been tested at this scale. 2,000 crew members, including engineers, doctors, scientists, and soldiers. They loaded supplies, ran final checks, and said goodbye to their families. On the morning of departure, Commander stood on the observation deck of the flagship, watching Earth grow small behind them. He had volunteered for this mission without telling anyone why, but everyone knew. He was looking for a way to make his survival mean something. Captain joined him as the fleet entered formation. 42 days, she said. Then we find out if we can actually do this. Nodded slowly. They sent a message saying they were listening, he said. The least we can do is answer. The engines fired. 17 ships accelerated toward the edge of human space, carrying the hope of 2 species into the darkness between stars. Behind them, Earth grew smaller and smaller until it was just another point of light in the vast ocean of the galaxy. Ahead of them lay unknown space, hostile territory, and a world full of strangers who had cried out for help. They were coming. The human fleet traveled through space that no human had ever seen before. They passed dead stars and empty worlds, moving faster than light through the darkness between galaxies. Captain barely slept during those 42 days. She spent her nights on the bridge, watching the stars streak past and thinking about what waited at the end of their journey. On the 23rd day, they encountered the 3 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly in front of the human fleet. They were massive vessels, bristling with weapons, each one larger than all 17 human ships combined. They were conquerors who had built their empire on the bones of weaker species. They did not like surprises in their territory. The lead ship hailed them immediately. A commander appeared. He was tall and broad, with 4 arms and skin like gray stone. His eyes were yellow and cold. "Human vessels," he said. "You are entering space without authorization. State your purpose or be destroyed." Captain stood before the screen, her hands clasped behind her back. She was aware that her entire fleet could be vaporized in seconds. She was also aware that turning back meant the death of an entire species. "We are traveling to Prime," she said calmly. "They have requested our assistance." The commander made a sound that might have been laughter. Those weak fish people, they are not your concern. Turn back now and we will allow you to live." Did not move. They asked for help, that makes them our concern. The commander leaned forward, his yellow eyes narrowing. "You are a primitive species. You have no power here. The conquered has already decided that Prime is not worth saving. Who are you to disagree?" "We are the ones who answered," said. For a long moment the commander stared at her. Then he shook his head slowly. "Foolish creatures, you will waste your ships and your lives for nothing. They have nothing to offer you." "We did not ask for payment." The commander went silent. He seemed genuinely confused, as if he could not understand the words she was speaking. In his world, everything had a price. Every action was a transaction. The idea of helping strangers for no reward was simply incomprehensible. "Go then," he said finally. "Throw your lives away. When you fail, the galaxy will remember human stupidity." The ships moved aside. Captain exhaled slowly as her fleet passed through, untouched. Behind her, Commander allowed himself a small smile. "I think we confused him," said. "Good," replied. "Let them be confused." They reached Prime on the 41st day. The planet hung in space like a blue pearl, its surface covered almost entirely by ocean. Lieutenant detected them first, watching her scanners with disbelief as 17 ships emerged from faster-than-light travel. "They came," she whispered. "Father, they actually came." Admiral stood beside her, his tired eyes fixed on the approaching vessels. He had not believed the humans would respond. He had not believed anyone would respond. But there they were, a fleet of ships from the other side of the galaxy, arriving just as they had promised. The first shuttle landed in the capital city at noon. Captain stepped onto soil with Commander beside her. They were met by herself, surrounded by guards who had never seen alien visitors before. Was smaller than had expected. They were delicate creatures, barely half-human height, with silver skin that shimmered in the light. But when spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries. "You came," said. "You actually came." Bowed her head respectfully. "You sent a message saying you needed help. We heard it." "But why?" asked. "We have nothing to offer you. The Conquered calculated our value and found us worthless. Why would you cross the galaxy for us?" Thought of Earth, of the vote that had passed by only 3 hands, of the 4,000 people who had volunteered knowing they might never return home. She thought of Commander, who had lost everything and was still searching for meaning. "Because you asked," she said simply, "and someone should have said yes." The work began immediately. Human engineers swarmed over the ships, adapting them to carry deflection equipment. Human doctors set up medical stations to treat workers who collapsed from exhaustion. Human scientists studied the asteroid, calculating trajectories and blast patterns. Engineer Lee was the youngest member of the crew. He was 23 years old, fresh out of the academy, and he had volunteered for this mission because he wanted to see something beyond Earth. Now he found himself working 18-hour days alongside engineers who spoke a language he could barely understand. Lieutenant was assigned to work with him. She had expected the humans to be cold and efficient, like the other spacefaring species she had heard about. Instead, she found cracking jokes while calibrating equipment, sharing his food rations with tired workers, teaching children to fold paper cranes during rest breaks. "Why do you make these?" asked, examining one of the paper birds. "It is an old tradition," explained. "On Earth, we believe that if you fold 1,000 cranes, you get 1 wish." "And what would you wish for?" Smiled. "Right now, I would wish for that asteroid to move about 300 kilometers to the left." Found herself laughing. It was the first time she had laughed in weeks. As the days passed, something strange began to happen. The humans stopped being strangers. They ate together, worked together, fell asleep in the same exhausted heaps after long shifts. Human doctors learned to treat injuries. Engineers learned to operate human equipment. They developed a shared language of gestures and drawings and patient repetition. Admiral watched it all with wonder. He had commanded ships for 40 years. He had dealt with traders and diplomats from a dozen species. He had never seen anything like this. One night, he found Captain on the observation deck of her ship, staring at the asteroid that hung in the sky like a second moon. "Your people amaze me," said. "They work themselves to collapse, then wake up and work again. They ask for nothing. They complain about nothing. Why?" Considered the question for a long moment. "When I was young," she said, "my grandmother told me a story about a village that was struck by a flood. The villagers had nothing. They lost their homes, their crops, everything. But people from neighboring villages came to help them. They brought food and tools and rebuilt the houses. When my grandmother asked why strangers would do such a thing, they said, 'Because someday we might need help too.'" She turned to face. "We are not here because we expect anything in return. We are here because this is who we want to be, a species that helps, a species that answers when someone calls." Was silent for a long time. Then he bowed his head slowly in the gesture of deepest respect. "Your species is strange," he said quietly, "but I am grateful that you exist." Smiled. "So are we, Admiral, so are we." Above them, the asteroid drifted closer. They had 12 days left. 3 days before impact, everything fell apart. The drilling teams had been working around the clock, boring deep into the asteroid's surface to plant deflection charges. The plan was simple: detonate the charges in a precise sequence, pushing the asteroid just enough to miss Prime. They had calculated every angle, every force, every variable. But the universe does not care about calculations. Engineer was the first to notice the problem. He was deep inside one of the drilling tunnels when his instruments began to flash red. The readings made no sense at first. Then they made terrible sense. He ran back to the surface, nearly killing himself in his hurry to reach the command center. When he burst through the door, covered in rock dust and gasping for breath, Captain knew immediately that something was wrong. "The core," said between breaths. "The core is unstable. It is not solid rock. It is like glass under pressure, full of cracks." Commander stepped forward, his face grim. "What does that mean for the deflection?" Pulled up the data on the main screen. The numbers painted a picture of disaster. "If we detonate the charges as planned, we will not push the asteroid away. We will shatter it. Instead of one impact, we will have thousands. Smaller pieces, yes, but still enough to destroy every floating city on the planet." The room fell silent. Lieutenant stood in the corner, her silver skin pale with horror. She had allowed herself to hope. She had watched the humans work miracles for weeks, and now, 3 days before the end, hope was crumbling. Sat down heavily, suddenly looking every one of her many years. "Then it is over," she said quietly. "We have failed." "No," Commander said. His voice was calm, almost peaceful. "There is another way." Everyone turned to look at him. Walked to the screen, pulling up a diagram of the asteroid. "The charges cannot push the asteroid away," he said. "But they can still break it apart if we control how it breaks. We need to detonate them from the inside, at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right pattern. The explosion will turn the asteroid into fragments small enough to burn up in the atmosphere." Captain saw where this was going. Her heart clenched. She said carefully, "The detonation you are describing would require someone inside the asteroid. At the core, there would be no way out." "I know." The silence stretched on, looked between the humans, not understanding. Admiral understood all too well. "You are talking about a suicide mission," said. "One of you would have to fly a ship into the asteroid and detonate your reactor manually." "Yes," said simply, "I volunteer." "No," Captain stepped forward, her hand reaching for his arm. "We can find another way. We can program a drone, we can." "The timing has to be perfect," interrupted gently. "Within microseconds, a drone cannot adapt to unexpected variables. A human can." He paused. "I can." "You cannot ask this of yourself," said. "We cannot accept such a sacrifice. Our lives are not worth yours." Turned to face her. For a moment his mask of calm slipped, and they could see the grief beneath, the weight of years of pain that he carried every day. "With respect, that is not your decision to make. I came here knowing I might not return. I came here because I needed this mission to mean something." He looked around the room, at the humans and who had worked side by side for weeks. "I lost my family in a flood," he said quietly. "I was in space when it happened. I watched from orbit while the waters rose, and there was nothing I could do. For years I asked myself why I survived when they did not. What was the point of living when I could not save the people I loved?" His eyes found the young lieutenant who had sent the message that brought them here. "Now I know. I survived so I could be here, so I could do this. Let me save your world. Let my life mean something." His eyes filled with tears. She had known this human for only a few weeks, but in that time he had become a friend, a teacher, a symbol of everything his species represented. The thought of losing him was unbearable. "There must be another way," she said desperately. She turned to, "You are an engineer. Find another solution, please." Looked at her helplessly. He had run the numbers 100 times. The mathematics were clear. There was no other way. Captain stood before Commander for a long moment. They had served together for 15 years. She had watched him carry his grief like a stone around his neck, never complaining, never asking for sympathy. She had always known he was looking for something. Now he had found it. "You stubborn old man," she said softly. "You planned this from the beginning, did you not?" Smiled, not planned, hoped perhaps. She embraced him tightly. Around them the crew stood in silence, some crying openly, others simply bowing their heads. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Ship was modified, stripped of everything except the essentials: engines, life support, and the overloaded reactor that would become his final weapon. The detonation sequence was programmed into the navigational computer. Every variable was accounted for. On the morning of the final day, stood in the hangar bay, surrounded by the people who had become his family. Captain was there, and Admiral and Lieutenant stood beside, both of them trying to hold back tears. "I am not good at speeches," said, "so I will keep this short." He looked at the gathered in the bay, thousands of silver faces watching him through tears. "You sent a message into the darkness," he said. "You asked if anyone was listening. I want you to know that we heard you. Earth heard you. And we answered because that is what humans do. We answer." He turned to the children gathered at the front of the crowd. Small faces, too young to understand what was happening, but old enough to remember. "Remember this," he said gently. "You are always worth saving. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." Then he climbed into his ship, sealed the hatch, and launched into the darkness. The flight to the asteroid took 6 hours, spent most of it in silence, watching the massive rock grow larger in his. He thought about his wife, his children, the family he had lost so long ago. He thought about Earth, about the blue oceans and green forests he would never see again. He thought about the children who would grow up because of what he was about to do. His final transmission came through clearly on every screen on Prime. "This is Commander of Earth, beginning final approach." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was soft. "It has been an honor." The ship entered the asteroid's core. The detonation sequence activated. For one brief instant, a new sun was born in the sky above Prime, brighter than both moons combined. Then the asteroid shattered. A million fragments scattered across the darkness, breaking and burning and fatting into nothing. The pieces that reached the atmosphere blazed like shooting stars, harmless streaks of light across the sky. On the surface below, billions watched in silence. Then slowly they began to weep, tears of grief for the human who had given everything, tears of joy for the world that had been saved. Lieutenant stood beside the empty space where ship had been. She whispered words in her own language that no human would ever hear. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you, thank you." Above her, the shooting stars continued to fall, each one a piece of death transformed into beauty by the sacrifice of one man who had crossed the galaxy to answer a stranger's cry for help. The news spread across the galaxy like fire. A primitive species from the edge of known space had done what the mighty Galactic Concord refused to do. They had crossed hostile territory, faced down warships, and saved a world that every advanced civilization had written off as worthless. And they had done it at the cost of one of their own. The story was impossible to ignore. Trading vessels carried it from system to system. Diplomats whispered about it in council chambers. Children on 100 worlds heard tales of the humans who answered when no one else would. 3 weeks after the asteroid's destruction, the Galactic Concord summoned Earth's representative to their great hall. Dr. Park made the journey alone, wearing a simple black suit and carrying nothing but a small data tablet. She had been preparing for this moment since the news arrived on Earth. The hall was vast beyond imagination. 12 species sat in a circle around a central platform, each delegation occupying its own section. The Eye with their calculating eyes, the with their stone-gray skin and 4 powerful arms. The Ancient, so old they barely moved. And others, species whose names had only read in reports. At the center of the circle, a single light illuminated the speaker's platform. Walk to it alone, feeling the weight of 12 civilizations watching her every step. The Eye Ambassador spoke first. His voice was cold and precise, like mathematics made sound. "You are the human representative," he said. It was not a question. "I am Dr. Park," she replied. "I speak for Earth." "We have heard what your species did at Prime," the ambassador continued. "We are curious. They offered you nothing in return for your intervention. No resources, no technology, no military alliance. Yet you sacrificed ships, personnel, and one of your senior commanders. Why?" Had known this question would come. She had practiced her answer a dozen times. But when she opened her mouth, the rehearsed words disappeared. Instead, she spoke from somewhere deeper. "You asked the wrong question," she said. The hall fell silent. The Eye Ambassador's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "When they sent their plea for help, you calculated their value. You measured their resources, their technology, their strategic importance. You weighed their lives against your cost and found them lacking." Paused, looking around the circle. "We asked a different question. We asked what kind of people we wanted to be." A murmur ran through the assembly. The commander who had confronted their fleet in space leaned forward, his yellow eyes fixed on her. "You are weak," he said. "Your species has barely learned to travel between stars. You have no army, no empire, no power, and yet you act as though you are superior to us." "We do not claim to be superior," replied calmly. "We are simply different. You measure worth in power. We measure worth in need. Someone needed help. We helped. It is not complicated." "And your commander," the pressed. "He threw his life away for strangers. That is not strength. That is foolishness." Felt something cold settle in her chest. She thought of the message he had sent to Earth before his final flight. "Commander did not throw his life away," she said quietly. "He gave it. There is a difference. He chose to die so that billions could live. You call that foolishness. We call it the highest form of courage." The elder spoke for the first time, his voice ancient and dry as dust. "You speak of values we do not share, human. The galaxy operates on calculation, survival of the fittest, profit and loss. Your sentimentality will not change that." "Perhaps not," agreed. "But they will remember what happened. They will tell their children and their children's children about the species that crossed the galaxy to save them. They will remember that when the powerful turned away, the weak came running." She smiled slightly. "And perhaps someday when someone else cries out for help, they will answer. Not because they expect payment, not because they calculate profit, but because once, long ago, someone answered their cry. That is how change begins. One act of kindness rippling outward, touching lives we will never know." The council fell silent, stood alone in the center of the circle, a single human surrounded by the might of 12 civilizations. She did not flinch. Finally, the Eye Ambassador spoke again. His voice was different now, less cold, almost thoughtful. "You are a strange species," he said. "We do not understand you." "That is all right," replied. "We are still learning to understand ourselves." 1 month later, Lieutenant stood on the shore of the great ocean near the capital. Behind her, construction crews were putting the final touches on a memorial. It was a simple structure, a pillar of white stone rising from the water, inscribed with words in both script and human language. The words read, "He came from the stars because we cried out and he answered." Captain Moon stood beside her, along with the surviving members of the human fleet. They had stayed to help with the rebuilding, refusing to leave until they were sure they could stand on their own. "It is beautiful," said quietly. Nodded, "It is not enough. Nothing would be enough, but it is what we can give." She turned to face. In the weeks since the asteroid's destruction, they had become close friends. The barriers of species and language had fallen away, replaced by something deeper. "I have been selected as the first ambassador to Earth," said. believes I am the best choice because I was the one who sent the message. Smiled, she is right, you will be excellent. I am afraid, admitted. I have never left my world before, everything I know is here. You already took the hardest step, said gently. You reached out into the darkness without knowing if anyone would answer. Going to Earth is easy compared to that. Engineer joined them, carrying a small box. Inside were 1,000 paper cranes, folded by children from across Prime. They were learning the human tradition, adding their own decorations to each one. For Commander said, the children wanted to send them with you. They said maybe if we fold enough we can wish him back. Took the box carefully. We will keep them on Earth, she said, in his memory. That evening, a new transmission left space. It was broadcast on every frequency, sent in every direction, reaching into the darkest corners of the galaxy where forgotten species lived and died unnoticed. The message was simple. If you need help, call Earth, they answer. Back on Earth, Doctor received the transmission in her office. She read it 3 times, then leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. Around her, the planet continued its slow rotation, a small blue world on the edge of a vast galaxy. They were still primitive by galactic standards, still weak, still learning, but something had changed. The story of Prime was spreading, carried by traders and travelers and refugees. Other species were beginning to wonder if humanity might be worth knowing after all. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, species that had given up hope were listening. They heard about a world that should have died but lived. They heard about a people who calculated worth in kindness instead of profit. They heard about a commander who sacrificed everything because strangers asked for help. And they began, slowly, to believe that perhaps the universe was not as cold as they had thought. In her office, opened her eyes and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, billions were looking back, their silver skin glowing under twin moons that still rose every night because one human had decided their lives were worth more than his own. That was the ripple, that was the change. It started with a message and a choice. It continued with a sacrifice and a memorial, and it would spread, year by year, world by world, until the galaxy itself was transformed. Not by power, not by force, but by the simple, radical act of answering when someone cried out for help. The story was not over, it was just beginning.